Hi, this is Regina Hopkins, and welcome to the latest in our podcast series on information important to nonprofit organizations. I'm with the Assistant Director of the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. Our co-sponsor for these podcasts is the Center for Nonprofit Advancement in Washington, D.C., which provides technical support and assistance to nonprofits in the greater D.C. area, and the Pro Bono Center, which provides legal assistance to nonprofits in Washington, D.C. We're being joined today by Joe Yule, who is a counselor at the Michigan Community Services Organization, which provides pro bono services for the state of Michigan. Joe is a graduate of Wayne State University Law School. He worked for 10 years as an attorney at the law firm of Miller Canfield. He also worked for 5 years in China on a small business that was making tea, indigenous tea in China, and then he came back and joined Michigan Community Services. So welcome, Joe, and thank you for being here today.
Hi, Regina. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So today's topic is, I think, an important one particularly in 2018, given all the noise out there. And it has to do with the restrictions on 501c3 organizations with respect to political activity, and what in this campaign season, what are some of the things that nonprofits cannot do, what they can do, and how to navigate those. So why don't we start, Joe, by basically saying, what are the rules? What's the basic rules that nonprofits have to follow?
Right. So what's driving a lot of this and the prohibition on nonprofits participating in political campaigns or lobbying is just right from the statute itself, which states 501c3 must demonstrate that they are organized and will operate exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, education, or other specified exempt purposes, that no part of its net earnings will inure to the private or the benefit of a private shareholder or individual. And then these are the two important parts. No part of its activities constitutes intervention or participation in any political campaign on behalf of any candidate for public office, and no substantial part of its activities consists of political or lobbying activities. And of course, what sounds pretty straightforward, once you start flushing a lot of this out, it becomes a little complicated for what you can and cannot do as a nonprofit organization.
Okay, so why don't we start with the first one that you mentioned, which is political activity. So what does that mean exactly?
Essentially what the IRS will look to determine if you are an exempt organization, a tax exempt organization, is what this term they have is an action organization. And the IRS regs sets out two ways that an organization can be an action organization. One is if they intervene in the campaign, or if more than a substantial part of their organization is dedicated to lobbying. And then under the Internal Revenue Code, all Section 501c3 organizations are absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign with any candidate for elective public office.
Is that just at the federal level, or what if I have someone running for city council? Do I have to worry about them too?
Yes, this prohibition is a very strict prohibition on an absolute prohibition on participating in any political campaign or candidate, local, state, or federal level.
Okay, so I understand I can't intervene, but I have a feeling that intervening may be in the eyes of the beholder. So what exactly does that mean?
Well, intervening is, I don't know what you mean by eye of the beholder, but it really is a pretty strict test. The only way you can participate in any kind of political activity is if it's a nonpartisan participation. And so the most classic, examples of that are get out the vote drives, voter registration, where you're out in the community asking people to vote, not voting for a specific candidate, but just in general. Otherwise, as soon as you go from a nonpartisan participation and you're trying to influence even subtly the election of a certain candidate over another, you have violated the strict prohibition.
Okay. And so what if can I have a candidate forum or send questions to the candidates, asking them what their positions are on issues that are really important to my organization? Like I'm an environmental organization. Can I ask them to get everybody to tell me and publicize what the positions are about the Clean Water Act, for example?
So you can elicit information from candidates. The where you're going to start running into a problem is if you start to show certain biases towards one candidate or another, or if there's two candidates with very divergent opinions or views on a specific issue, and that some of the language that's being used is kind of implying the organizations where their support goes to. Once you start crossing the line from a nonpartisan, just trying to get data, trying to get information, and once you're starting to put the official seal of approval behind the organization into one candidate, that's where you're going to get into trouble. So what's difficult about talking about this is that a lot of the examples you gave are possible, but you have to go on a case-by-case basis to kind of flush out and make sure that what's being done is nonpartisan and that you're not supporting in any way, either explicitly or implicitly, your support for one candidate.
So like a candidate forum. Can I have a candidate forum? Can I invite people to come and talk to us about their positions on issues?
You could. Again, you would have to make sure you're inviting all candidates, and then all of them have a similar platform to kind of explain what their beliefs are, or what their platform is. Again, here's kind of the regs kind of show what they would be looking for. They're looking for evidence to take away tax-exempt status, and that's evidence of bias that would favor one candidate over another, oppose a candidate in some manner, or have the effect of favoring a candidate or group of candidates. So in your example of having some kind of a forum where the candidates can come, if you are favoring certain candidates by not allowing others to participate, you are then going to be found to be intervening in the campaign, because you've given certain candidates the opportunity to come before people to give their opinions and their beliefs, whereas you're restricting others. So it's just very important whenever you start involving yourself with candidates that what you're really doing is making sure you're not giving an avenue to allow a candidate to market himself in ways that others aren't.
And so I assume, one of the things, the questions that you ask, you can't sit there and say, are you in favor of clean water, or are you in favor of dirty, filthy, rotten polluters? That might be a problem, I'm guessing.
Well, certainly that's right. Anything you're doing that's going to kind of suggest where the position of the organization is and where the support of the organization is. As soon as you start showing those biases, or giving an advantage or poisoning the well, in the example of phrasing certain questions to kind of show where your support is or where this candidate should be, what they should or should not be supporting, that's then going to start violating these regulations.
Okay. Now, I assume, I can't intervene. That means I can't give money. Our organization can't write a check to a candidate. But what about use of the facilities or time or release time or something like that? Is that problematic as well?
Yes, any benefit you're giving to a candidate is going to be in violation of the regulations. So on one side, when you're dealing with action organizations and trying to make a determination of what constitutes an action organization, the campaign intervention side is the easiest to understand because it is a strict prohibition. So if you're allowing a candidate to use your conference rooms or to have meetings in your facility, this is giving a benefit. Even if it's not money, you're giving a benefit to help with that campaign, and that's absolutely prohibited.
Okay. Now, one of the things that a lot of nonprofits like to do is they like to advocate in the public arena for particular issues, like full funding for four-year-old kindergarten or something like that. And they're constantly out there advocating for that. And all of a sudden, a political campaign comes along, and that's an issue in the campaign. How do they not look like they're being biased in those contexts? How do they have to stop their public advocacy during campaign season, or what are they supposed to do?
Yeah, so this is a real tricky area for nonprofits. So you have the two ways you can be an action organization, through lobbying and through campaign intervention. And so in kind of a normal world outside of a campaign, an organization is free to lobby so long as it's not a substantial part of the organization's activities. However, as we've become more politicized in the US, candidates really are no longer people. They're kind of, it almost seems as if they're a laundry list of issues. So candidate A will be, for issue A, B, and C, and candidate B will be for issues X, Y, and Z. So for a nonprofit, if you are traditionally lobbying on issue A, it's going to become pretty apparent which candidate you would be supporting, simply because these issues are driving these campaigns now. So the closer you get to election, these issues start to intertwine, these issues being what constitutes lobbying activity and political intervention. And so you're going to have to start walking a really fine line if you are an organization that traditionally lobbies on certain issues, because campaigns now are becoming inherently issue driven. And if you are handing out brochures or speaking at town hall meetings in favor of a particular issue, and that issue is the deciding issue, or even a issue in the campaign, it's going to be very likely the IRS is going to see that as you intervening in a campaign.
Okay, but what do I do if an important bill is coming before the legislature? Will I still be able to contact legislators and push for the adoption of the law?
Well, you can still lobby. Well, I mean, this is a difficult question to answer without real facts and understanding of what the situation is. Usually what we advise for lobbying is just to have all organizations, this is my advice, I don't know what you're doing in DC, but electing for a 501h status, which allows pretty significant, up to 25% of all of your net income to be allocated towards lobbying. So if your question is going to the state capitol to lobby the senators on a particular bill, saying we support the inaction of this bill, then that of course is okay. The problem is if the passing of that bill is fertile grounds for an election, and that's one of the issues being discussed, then all of a sudden you're going to have to kind of evaluate all of the facts and circumstances around what you're doing as an organization to make sure that what you're doing is properly considered lobbying and not intervening in a campaign, and not supporting one candidate over the other, or providing certain support, be it goodwill or otherwise, to someone who's campaigning.
So it's a gray area is what you're saying.
It's an extremely gray area, especially, as I said, because we've become so politicized, and these issues now, it's no longer about the smile of a candidate. It really is if candidate believes in issues, and then there's a laundry list of issues that they believe. So the more that campaigns are being driven by issues, the more this area becomes, a darker color of gray.
Okay. The other thing that I think some nonprofits wonder is, okay, I understand the organization can't get involved in the campaign, but what about me? I'm an employee of the organization. I mean, maybe the executive director, or maybe on the board of directors. Do I have to stay silent, or can I, as an individual, participate? And how do I do that in a way that's not going to implicate my nonprofit?
So the quick answer is no. That doesn't mean, as a board member or executive director, that you you have to abstain from participating in the political process. But what it means is that you have to create real defined firewalls between you as an individual and you as an agent of the organization. And the IRS, and I use agent intentionally, the IRS uses kind of the agency law. And what does that mean? That means if you're the executive director and you're sending out emails asking people to show up to support a specific issue, and on the email you use the signature line you use as an executive director, you're putting yourself out as the executive director of an organization, then all of a sudden it's likely people start seeing you as the executive director, no longer as the individual. So no commingling of email addresses, not using stationery, acting as if you would as if you were not employed by that organization. And it's very important that there's absolutely no commingling between assets of the organization and your own personal assets. So if it's not using stationery, not calling from the phone, not using the email server, using all of your own personal equipment, your own money, because as soon as you start using some of the assets of the organization, it'll be seen as the organization providing that support and no longer you as an individual.
So I can't stay at after 5 o'clock and start photocopying flyers, campaign flyers, or something like that.
Well, certainly not that. That using the resources like paper, machinery. I mean, these are real contributions that you would be giving to a candidate. So that would certainly be prohibited.
Okay. Now, what if I just say, people say, "Who are you?" And I say, "Well, I'm Joe Smith. I'm the executive director of this organization." Is that okay? Can I sort of give biographical information, or can a candidate say that they volunteered for us when that is factually true? What about those types of just basic factual biographical information?
So the problem is, and again, this is all more you're kind of walking through these gray areas, these foggy areas of the law. A lot of it's going to depend on the position at the organization. If you're a secretary of organization, it's likely not going to be very impactful because secretary is not going to have a lot of ability to drive an organization. But the higher you get in the hierarchy, the more likely what you're really saying by giving this, factual information is, this is my position and I have certain authority over my opinion because of my position. And that's where it starts becoming problematic. So yes, you can give factual information, but again, you have to analyze how that information is going to be interpreted by the world. Is it, this is simply what I do in my day job, having coffee with someone, talking about a political campaign, or is it, this is what I do and therefore you should listen to me because I have certain authority over this issue. And the more it leans towards the latter, the more likely the IRS is going to interpret it as political intervention, is giving support to a candidate.
Okay, one thing that comes up a lot, I know, is, okay, so an organization is having a groundbreaking, or they're opening a new facility, or they're launching some new initiative, and in a normal non-election year, they would invite the local representative with a city council person, maybe the mayor, and so just to give some sort of sense of occasion to the event and to get more news coverage and the like. And now it's an election year. Can they still invite the mayor, or even though the mayor is running for re-election, or is that just they shouldn't do it? They can't do it.
Well, yes, you can invite a political official, council member, mayor, to come for the groundbreaking. But again, this is you are doing a real good job, Regina, of finding this gray area. You have to make sure that when you give the microphone to that politician, that they don't have, or they don't go into their stump speeches, that they don't start campaigning, that what they're there for is the groundbreaking. You cannot give an avenue to allow that politician to start campaigning or even be perceived as campaigning. So again, a lot of this has to do with timing, has to do with kind of what's going around in your community. You have to make a determination, the likelihood that when the mayor puts the microphone to their mouth, that when they don't start saying things like, we have to make sure, well, we've all been through this, listening to politicians, but you just have to make sure that when they're speaking, they're not speaking about the political campaign. And it's a real tricky thing to do because most, elected officials, that's not their instinct.
Yeah.
And so
there's a crowd, there's a microphone, they want to start going at it, basically.
Yeah. So the advice I would give is, it's always going to be dependent on kind of the atmosphere. the towns, if you're in a town of 300 people, it's a lot different than, here in Detroit with 600,000 people. Um, so a lot of this is it's just, you have to look at the circumstances and the facts and make a decision, but you have to be very intentional, and you have to be very aware of what you're opening yourself up to in the organization by allowing politicians, especially the closer you get to election periods, by giving them a platform to talk.
Yeah, it probably makes sense before you do so to have a conversation with maybe one of their staff people to sort of say, this is the ground rules we have to follow. Is that going to be okay? Just so, because I think some of the less sophisticated politicians may not be as sensitive to this as some of the more experienced politicians might be.
Well, that's certainly true, but I hate emphasizing that. I mean, you certainly have to talk to the politician and say, listen, we can't have you speaking about, A, B, and C. But highlighting that gets a little tricky, because I don't want organizations to believe that because you did that, that somehow you're protecting the organization. Any agreements that you made to speak or not to speak, it's kind of irrelevant if the politicians just gets up and starts speaking about political campaigns, because what you've done by giving that microphone and you're providing support to someone to continue their campaign. So you have to be careful. Yes, it's very important to talk to the politician or to the elected official, but it's even more important that you have thought through all of the issues as an organization before handing over the microphone.
Yeah, it's only helpful if it works, is what you're saying.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. That's right.
Yeah. So, we're getting up to time here. So I wanted to just talk about something that I hear all the time, which is, well, how come we can't give a letter grade, but how come, say, the NRA does it or the Sierra Club does it? They give letter grades all the time. How come they can do it and we can't? So, so I asked that question to you. How come the Sierra Club can rate candidates, but my 501c3 cannot?
Well, I also get that question, and my answer is always, you can, but not as a 501c3. So all of the prohibitions we've been talking about in this podcast are for 501c3 charitable organizations. And a lot of the times the references you made, if it's the Sierra Club, if it's the NRA, what you're looking at are actually organizations that would be social welfare organizations or 501c4 organizations. And they are allowed to have more participation in the political campaign. So my response is always, you can. And if you are interested in doing something, you should reorganize as a 501c4 as opposed to a 501c3. And so that's usually what the difference is. And it does get confusing, especially because the sophistication of those organizations, that there's layers to the organization. So you have now for-profit arms, the 501c3 charitable organization, which, in the NRA's case is dedicated just to gun education. You have your lobbying, you have your super PACs. And so there's all of these various sections of these organizations, each one then kind of participating in their communities in completely different ways as allowed by law. And again,
but
a lot of that,
bearing the same name, so it sounds like it's interchangeable.
Intentionally bearing the same name, so that the organization seems more of an advocacy organization. And for organizations that are interested in getting involved more politically and are interested in kind of exploring different ways to organize their organizations, it's really important then to sit down with an attorney and kind of figure out what your intentions are, what you would like to do, and then the best means of organizing yourself so that you're allowed to do that. Because what you really don't want to do is have your tax exempt status revoked, having to go back to your donors, explaining that all the donation they made through the following year are no longer exempt, and the embarrassment that causes. So it's very important at the front end that if you're an organization who wants to become politically active, that you address those issues before you start engaging so that you are properly protected as an organization.
And it's my understanding, like the Sierra Club will have like a 501c3 and they'll have a 501c4 and they're funded differently. And the C4 is the one that will, in fact, engage in the much more extensive lobbying and political activity than any charitable organization can do so. And that's how they structure it.
That's right. I mean, this is, Citizens United has been a real big decision by the Supreme Court, and it's dealing with this very issue in a lot of ways, the 501c4s and the funding. The other thing that allows these organizations to do, not only get politically active, but the donors can hide through the anonymity of their donation. So that 501c4s are not required to explain where the donations are coming from specifically, as opposed to super PACs. So you'll notice in the last 7 years, there's been a huge shift. I think the IRS now said 501c4s outspent super PACs 3-2 in the last presidential election. So there's real advantages and there's real strength to 501c4s for organizations looking to become more politically involved.
Mm-hmm. But as long as you want to stay in the C3, I would say the one advantage for a C3 is contributions to them are tax deductible, unlike the C4s. And that's why it's, if you aren't going to be politically active, you want to be a C3. So that your donors get the advantage of the tax savings. This has gone very fast. It goes faster than we think in terms of it. So I guess to sum up, what you're saying is, you don't be careful about your political activities or any activities you have, so that they are not viewed as political activities under the IRS donations. And there's a lot of gray areas. So if you're going to do something, I guess it makes sense to talk to a lawyer before you do that candidate forum or invite that politician or whatever, just so you understand what the do's and don'ts are. You don't step on inadvertently over the line.
Yes, and I would go one step further, that it's really important for organizations to sit down with all of the staff and really walk through some of these issues as well. Because it's not just the executive director or the board members that can get an organization into trouble. Program managers can go out, and a lot of times some of the more socially active individuals are the staff members. So it's just important that the organization does its due diligence, provide proper training, and really articulate the pitfalls of staff members getting involved in politics as staff members of a nonprofit, and what the repercussions could be for the organization.
And I'm just thinking that also, as the elections come closer, and they're going to be pretty emotional, I think, this year, that, you maybe be in a position to sort of explain to volunteers and donors why you can't get involved in certain activities as well.
Yes, that conversation is also very important.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, well, thank you so much for Joe, for taking time today. I think that this is it will be an interesting topic going forward, because I think, as I said, it's going to be a very lively election season this year. It already is.
It's already overwhelming, correct?
Yeah, primary season is already starting, and there are there's a lot going on. So thank you for taking the time, as I said, to talk to us today, and we'll keep everybody informed of any new developments. So
yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, thanks.
Regina?
Hold on, I have to stop recording. Okay, I don't know.